of right now, New Orleans is definitely the target for this hurricane.
2005, Hurricane Katrina approaches the Gulf Coast of the United States. By August the 28th, Katrina is upgraded to a Category 5 storm, the storm New Orleans had always feared.
Every person is hereby ordered to immediately evacuate the city of New Orleans.
We will do everything in our power to help the people and the communities affected by this storm. I urge all citizens to put their own safety and the safety of their families first by moving to safe ground.
But safe ground would all but vanish as the city's protective shell, its levee walls, would topple under the floodwaters.
The levees were breaking, and you could see it was almost like raging rapids in a river.
You don't feel the danger. So I didn't think that the levee walls would give way.
And the water just come up, just out of nowhere. And everybody here was trying to head for higher ground, and there is no higher ground.
Excuse me.
Residents of New Orleans were left stranded, abandoned by those in authority, with anger centered on the Bush administration for not acting faster.
Talking to the mayor in those areas, one of the things
Mr.
you've got to figure out what to do with all of the
They're using a different playbook than everybody else down here was using.
I almost died. I was within seconds of dying for nothing.
And when help finally did arrive, it wasn't extended to everyone.
They had 40 buses going out. Not one bus picked us up. We stood there and cried. The people didn't help us.
Yeah.
You think that was right? Because we black.
2 years on, New Orleans still lays in ruins. And what happened was not just a natural disaster, but a human catastrophe.
I'd never let my son sign up for the military. Why should they fight for this country? This country won't fight for us now.
The city of New Orleans, a city submerged, humbled by a force of nature, left in tatters by human failure.
80% of the city was underwater and was continuing to get deeper and deeper. The levees were breaking, and you could see it was almost like raging rapids in a river just flowing into these neighborhoods. I saw gas lines that were completely ruptured, and you had 100-foot flames shooting up in the air.
The levees which surround New Orleans, a protective skeleton of drainage canals, would not only fail, they would break the back of the city and its people. With hundreds of thousands trapped in their homes, some tried to escape the floodwaters by any means possible. The official response to cries for help was fatally slow. For rescue crews already in New Orleans, the task was overwhelming.
There's times when I wake up and I can remember faces that I rescued that I didn't remember, a few weeks ago, and there was so many rescues that went on during that time that it's really hard to remember everyone. So it was something you see out of a horror story. There was one particular time where one of our rescue swimmers saw an American flag floating down on the water, and he wanted to go investigate and see what was going on. And when he lifted that flag, there was a dead body under it. Things like that happen very regularly. So a lot of that plays on your mind. You just have to go with the punches.
For Coast Guard rescue swimmer Dave Foreman, plucking people from rooftops was not only a dangerous challenge, but something he never thought he'd have to encounter.
Well, neighborhood rescues are a little different than what we train for. We never really have, on-the-job training for what we did those couple of weeks. Sometimes we went down just to rescue a couple people, and sometimes we thought we were rescuing just one or two that were on the rooftops. When we looked in the house, there was 15, 20 or more people, part of their families or part of the neighborhoods that had congregated in that house. They were everywhere.
Police totally unable to restore order.
Amid the chaos, lawlessness would quickly descend upon New Orleans.
I have instructed the Highway Patrol and the National Guard to treat looters ruthlessly.
Some were merely desperate for food and water. Others simply had taken the law into their own hands. Rumors of rapes and shootings spread as fast as the floodwaters.
Tried to leave the convention center, they killing people.
They got raped.
Superdome, they got raped.
For some, rumor almost became a reality.
Her neighborhood wasn't flooded, just the outlying parts of it where she was trapped. We went down into the neighborhood and we hoisted her up. But we didn't realize, which she told me later, that there was a gang of guys and they were beating on her door on the opposite side as we were rescuing her, and they were getting ready to break in, and she said, we rescued her just in time because they were about to overtake her.
Despite promises for help, New Orleans was a city abandoned by its own leaders in government, despite best assurances.
The challenges that we face on the ground are unprecedented. But there's no doubt in my mind we're going to succeed.
But on nearly all levels of authority, the people of New Orleans were left to fend for themselves, including those who were supposed to have been in the protection of the law.
And I remember very clearly praying to God that, you please do not let me become trapped inside this jail in a hurricane situation.
Confined to a prison cell, Roderick Dean and other inmates at New Orleans Parish Prison were faced with no means of escape.
The head jailer, I assume he went from cell to cell with two of his henchmen. And he came in the cell and basically made a speech saying, we are going to ride this Category 5 hurricane out, turned around, walked away, and left, and we never saw him again. We were looking out the window. We were watching the roof come off of the Superdome. I watched the roof peel away from the Superdome, from my bedroom window in the jail, okay? And we saw all sorts of debris flying all over the place.
Inside the jail, the situation was looking ominous.
I reached and I grabbed the blanket at the foot of my bed. My blanket was soaking wet. Sometime later that day, the first signs of water entering the cell, it raced across the floor from a corner of the room and just rising, quickly.
Like caged rats, the prisoners thought they'd simply been left to drown.
As reality sank in at that moment in time, I knew that there was nothing that I could do. And at that point, my life flashed before my eyes. I visualized my body floating in the water. I almost died. I was within seconds of dying.
Others, though, across New Orleans, would rather face death than leave their homes.
Everybody was saying, the mayor's on the radio and the TV say, y'all got to evacuate. We were fighting with the seniors. Y'all, the seniors didn't want to leave. These people said, lock me in my house. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die in here. We were actually begging them to get out.
Those homes soon became watery tombs. Streets turned to canals littered with corpses.
Our oldest senior back here, I think she was 99 years old. And the last time I seen her, she was going across the courtway, trying to get to the higher up, and that's the last time I seen her. We couldn't do nothing for them. We couldn't do nothing for them. We couldn't do nothing for ourselves.
For those evacuated, this would be their new home, New Orleans Superdome. But if residents had fled fearing death, the conditions they would face were a ghastly alternative inside the massive sports arena.
When we first got there, it was kind of all right. But Lord, after the next day, when you walk to the door, the smell would knock you down.
Even this evacuation plan, without enough food and water, was disastrous.
There was no milk, there was no water. We had young women who had just had babies. We were pouring waters on them so that they could breastfeed their babies, actually pouring water to keep their breasts clean, because there was no way these babies wouldn't have never survived.
They treated us like if we was prisoners. I mean, I just couldn't understand it. They treated us to me, they treated us horrible. Like if we was the prisoners, like we did something wrong. Right. We didn't cause the storm. Right.
Many would be left to question the value of human life. at least seen through the eyes of those in charge.
You know that would hurt it, baby. You know what hurted me so bad. Them people brought 40 buses and had us lined up. You know how they got us? They backed us up with a truck like they was giving out water to you. They had 40 buses going out. Yeah. Not one bus picked us up. We stood there and cried.
Yeah, they had
with the police escort and had us sitting there waiting to get wet. The people didn't help us. You think that was right? Because we black. That wasn't right. We sat there and watched them drive away with the buses with police escort. We were still standing up for help. Yeah. And people drove off and left us. Yeah, old people laying against the wall in the dome. It was dead. There was nothing you could do for them. People just covered them up.
I flew over the city a couple of days later, and at 1,400 feet, you could smell the odor of the city, which was just this amazing stench.
Mark Schleifstein won the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting of Hurricane Katrina. He predicted the storm would come and feared the levees would indeed fail.
The engineers that built these projects all had the ability of looking at this and saying, hey, we've done this wrong. You know, you think about a major metropolitan city with 80% of it underwater, and it just boggles the mind. You could literally drive from New Orleans Airport to Venice, which is 90 miles, and the entire way for 90 miles. I mean, that's a huge, huge amount of devastation that was occurred by this storm.
What he and many others didn't predict was the failure of the federal government in its response to such a disaster.
They're using a different playbook than everybody else down here was using. Everybody else here turns to page 2 and says, well, the feds are supposed to be here in 2 days, while the feds are going, well, we need an official note from each individual emergency preparedness leader saying they need our help. Well, they'd already done that.
But now, more than 2 years later, many simply cannot foresee a brighter future.
There will still be devastation here 10 to 15 years from now. You'll still see communities that look like they were bombed out.
The city of New Orleans, or quite simply, what was left of it. Hollow homes, hollow lives, a city with its soul torn out. And for so many, the devastation was beyond anything they could have imagined.
Well, the walls of the levee were put up just a few years ago, and they gave us, I think, a false sense of security here, because you never saw the water, and no matter how high it rose, you had the feeling that, you know, it was being controlled and could be pumped back into the lake or what have you. So I had that false sense of security. You know the water is there, but you don't see it, so you don't feel the danger. So I didn't think that the levee walls would give way like they did. No. I went through this sort of spiritual thing where I went out to the lake. Lake Pontchartrain is very close by, and sort of try to feel a sense what the weather was like, and I didn't get good signals. Basically, you know, I was just trying to sense if it was coming, and the signal that I got was, I'm coming, you better get out. I'm coming for you.
Dr. Michael White would finally heed the warning signs, fleeing the flood before his house was inundated. But for one of New Orleans' most prominent jazz musicians, returning home to survey the damage was like seeing part of history washed away.
I had instruments that belonged to musicians that played with Jelly Roll Morton that were competitors to Louis Armstrong. I had a lot of stuff in here.
Homes here may eventually be rebuilt, But residents have lost more than a roof over their heads. They've lost part of themselves.
The first time I opened the house and saw everything scattered all around, it was like not looking at my possessions or my life's work. It was like looking at my own body, torn and scattered into bits and pieces all over the house. And it was a horrible feeling. You feel like everything is over. You don't know when, if, or how you can ever start again, where you would start. Because at that moment, I really realized more than ever before that everything was gone. Everything was gone. 30 years of memories, 30 years of hard work, 30 years of collection, spending quite a lot of money, quite a lot of time, quite a lot of love, just all gone.
More than 1,000 people lost their lives as a direct result of Hurricane Katrina. Unofficial estimates say the number is 4 times that. But the psychological effect is still being measured.
We started gutting out the house, and after a few hours, I couldn't do anything else. I had to come out the house, and I had to stop. I was starting to have breathing problems. Psychologically, I couldn't go back in the house.
If the return home has been difficult, the road to rebuilding has been plagued by financial and political potholes.
I think, we had this false sense of security also, like with the levees, in the sense that we were protected and covered by, the government, and that we would be taken care of. I mean, that's what we pay taxes for and all this. But there has been a general sense of abandon, almost. If you look at the condition of the city today, it is basically deplorable.
The reality is that people are still struggling to find places to live or to deal with the places that they're living in. There are thousands of people still living in FEMA trailers, very small, basically holiday campers, where they're basically stuffed in a little metal box and living while they are trying to figure out how to rebuild their house. In a lot of cases, those people are caught in a situation where they're expecting to get money from a federal grant program called Road Home to help pay for the rebuilding of their house. But that program, which is run by the state, has been poorly operated and has been very slow in handing out money. It's been 2 years, and they've barely given out a third of the money.
Mark knows personally how agonizing the recovery has been. This is what remains of his own family home.
Is there a definite feeling amongst those who live in New Orleans that the federal government is not doing what they should be doing in terms of getting things back up and running? Yeah, I think that's pretty clear from everything that you see.
We have been forgotten. I don't feel it, I know it. I live here. I see what happens every day. At one time they would give assistance. Now the only thing keep us going now on hard days is churches. But we get nothing from the government. I mean, we are forgotten.
And when you see the lower 9th Ward today, you can see why residents have a right to feel forgotten. What used to be a thriving black neighborhood is an appalling wasteland, an area which looks like an atomic testing ground. Amongst the deserted homes, Stephen and Luana Ellis are trying to piece their lives back together. But together, parents of 7 children, they live a ghost-like existence, haunting reminders of what this area was once like.
Well, everywhere around now you see lots, abandoned lots. Well, those lots was once homes. These streets was full of people. I think they got maybe like in a mile area, my street runs about a mile, there might be about 4 occupants in a mile when it was over 400. It was the summertime, the kids had parks, playgrounds. You go to the park now, you gotta worry about snakes. Go to the park now, you got to worry about the debris that's still in the park. It's not cool for your kids to get out your eyesight.
Trapped in a trailer with literally nowhere else to go, there is no hiding the fear of these people if a hurricane were to hit them again.
That's another thing. When storms come, we worry. I mean, we see clouds every day, and we worry, is this gonna hold? When houses didn't hold, and I live in a lower ninth ward. I know what it was like. It's very hard. I mean, when your kids are used to running around playing, and now they confined to an 8x10 box, almost like they're in prison. They have to go to school. They have to catch the bus to school. I got a 4-year-old, he go to school. He's gonna have to catch a public transit way on 25 miles away. His first day of school gonna be 25 miles away because the school around the corner not built. I'd never let my son sign up for the military. Why should they fight for this country? This country won't fight for us now. You got a war, we funding a war in another country. Yeah, right. When you need to fund your people right here. They're not doing nothing to help their own people.
Some would argue what happened in New Orleans exposed a dark side of America, and that here in the South, racial discrimination has once again reared its ugly head.
I wish it were as simple as saying that the leaders of the federal government were racist and were doing this for racist means, but I know that's not true just based on what they're doing. The reality is that there are thousands of white residents of New Orleans and the metropolitan area who have been devastated by this and are still homeless. There are more African Americans, largely because the worst damage was done to the largest population of African Americans in the metropolitan area.
If you're just not in that number of that quota, whether you're white or whether you're black, you're not getting it. You're not getting it.
And that is the black and white reality in New Orleans.
There's a new reality about what New Orleans will be. A huge amount of the African American community is gone, and there are real questions about whether or not it will come back.
What happened in New Orleans was the worst natural disaster to be compounded by human failure in United States history.
I had a search and rescue case years ago where I didn't think that I would ever see anything that big. It was an oil tanker that had exploded off of the eastern coast of North Carolina. And then Hurricane Katrina happened.
What happened at the mercy of Mother Nature may have been inevitable. What hasn't happened since Hurricane Katrina is a sad reflection on human nature and the nature of a government which has turned its back on those most in need.
All you hear is who they blaming, who were wrong. We're not looking at who was wrong. It could have been handled in a very different way.
I don't have a choice. New Orleans music is my life, it's my heritage. While my head might be telling me something else, my heart tells me there's no choice. I have to be here. So, in a sense, I'm like the captain of the Titanic. I have to go down with the ship. Although we hope the ship won't go down.